take questions during, or do you want to wait till the end? Totally up to you.
So I do have
Q&A at the end.
a Q&A time allotted at the end of it. If
Okay.
anyone has a specific question though during, I think a great idea would be to just put it into the Zoom chat. That way at the end of it, I can even just start by going through those. And if anyone wants to
Right.
chime in and out loud, we can do a combination of those two. But if you have a
Awesome.
burning question in the moment, write it down and then we'll talk about it at the end just to keep things flowing well. I'll
Thank
hopefully
you.
keep this relatively, conversational, but still it might be easier. Knowing me, I'll lose my train of thought if I'm jumping around the pages. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, start broadcast. All right, and let me get, oh, here we go. Oh, computers. There we go. Can everyone see this okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. So we'll get started. So first and foremost, thank you all so much for having me. I'm really excited to be talking in front of you guys today and to be able to have a good discourse between people who really are passionate about the game of golf as I am. I'm sure you guys are all a lot better at swing, and Jeff can tell you that for sure. But my job is really here to talk about musculoskeletal stress in golf. So that is your muscles, joints, and bones, how that stress accumulates, how it contributes to injury, and how managing that stress supports both performance and longevity. Now, before I get into anything, I just want to put a caveat. This isn't a swing lecture or a rehab talk per se. It's really a conversation about how the body responds to the repeated stresses of golf and what we can influence as coaches and practitioners to, help keep our athletes out of injury. And before we dive in, I just want to give a little roadmap for today, just so you guys understand where we're going to be going with things. The first thing I'm going to talk about after my bio is how the body manages load and why injuries actually occur. We'll talk about why stress shows up in predictable areas, because in golf, it's often not a random injury. It's really something that we can predict based on some things we'll talk about later. We'll talk about some key physical capabilities that are necessary for an efficient, repeatable golf swing and how we can prime those movements in warm up, which gets into preparing the body. We'll talk about warm ups, load management for our golfers, as well as aspects of recovery that I think are really important. And finally, I'll try to leave you guys with some practical takeaway that you guys can take and apply to your coaching practices. But first, a little bit about me. My name is Dr. Andrew Cervi. I'm a chiropractor who practices in Oakville and Burlington at Dynamic Health and Performance. And my focus is a lot on athletes, musculoskeletal health and athletic performance. Most of my job is helping athletes manage the really high physical demands of various sports across various levels, from junior to the professional level. I actually had the opportunity, not last year, but the year before, to work at the Fortinet Cup. So I got to be there at the PGA Tour of Americas, providing care for their golfers leading up to and during the tournament. So that was a really fun and exciting experience for myself. And just at the end of the day, the big thing that I always kind of came back to is that the same injury patterns were happening again and again between junior golfers to these professionals, and across, even different sports, you see these repetitive patterns occur. And you realize that they're, again, really random. They usually trace back to how we load, how we move, and how we recover over time. So let's kind of get to the first thing, is why this matters. Why are we talking about this at all? Why am I in front of you? And although to the naked eye, golf might look like a very leisurely game, ultimately it is a very repetitive, high velocity rotational sport. It is very physically demanding. And although most golf injuries aren't traumatic, they don't happen usually with one bad swing. They develop gradually over time, which is something that we're going to talk about and is be a key theme throughout our presentation here. And that's important because gradual problems that come on are often predictable, and the key thing is modifiable. We can make changes before these occur, so we're not reactive, we're more proactive, ultimately. Let's first talk about why injuries occur. Now, how an injury happens. And the first thing that has to be understood is that every tissue in the body, your muscles, your ligaments, your bones, they have a tolerance to load. In golf, that load isn't just weight, it's volume, speed of the swing, repetitions, intensity, and the frequency in which you do it. And as well, the capacity of those tissues isn't fixed. We'll talk about this a lot more later, but it's something that fluctuates based on training exposure, recovery, fatigue, stress, and a host of different things. And ultimately, when an injury occurs, when the load of a tissue exceeds its capacity to handle it. When it's no longer able to tolerate it, something breaks down. Now, the two main ways that we see this are either it happens all at once or it happens over time. So the first way that tissue gets overloaded is that acute traumatic injury. You have that single event that is what we call above the threshold of your tissue capacity, as you can see here. A football player tears their ACL, or a soccer player blows out their Achilles. It's one above threshold event that is very high in energy that then results in something exceeding the capacity and then injury. The next pattern we see, which is a lot more frequent, sorry, it's a little loud in here, but the one is more frequent in golf is the overuse injury. So what happens is it's a cumulative load that occurs over time, where it's a sub-threshold amount of force, not enough force to go above the capacity, but it's that repetitive force again and again. This green line we see is our tissue capacity. And as we keep exposing ourselves to these sub-threshold forces, and we don't have the necessary recovery strategies, our tissue capacity goes down until a point where a sub-threshold load or force exceeds their capacity, and that's when an injury occurs. You'll very commonly see in golf, a golfer will say, nothing happened. I was just swinging, and next thing you know, I'm in pain here. Now, the big issue with that is something did happen. It just happened over time. It happened gradually. And before I move on, I'm just going to ask them to turn the music down for just 1 second. I apologize. Give me 2 seconds. I'll be right back.
No problem. I think he's doing a great job. This is pretty interesting.
Yeah, so where Dr. Andrew works is they do a lot of team training. So that they're at the Conacher Hockey Arena in Burlington, and they have team training. They have an outdoor training. They have soccer field. So there's lots going on there. Good, Andrew. Thank you.
Recollect myself here. Okay. So we're talking about how stress accumulates in the body, and we said how that's predictable. A way to make sense of how that stress shifts is through the concept of what we call regional interdependence. I'm hoping that this isn't blocking anything for you guys.
No, it's fine.
Okay, good. So what's important to understand is that the body works as a connected system where dysfunction in one region oftentimes increases stress somewhere else. And if I can't use my thoracic spine, the lumbar spine will have to take more of that load, for example. Oftentimes we get pain appearing in areas that are far away from the primary contributor, right? So it also explains why that when we're treating pain clinically, oftentimes we're treating the pain at the site of the pain, and we're not seeing the results we're looking for, mainly because we're treating a symptom, not the actual key contributor, the root cause of that pain. Another way to kind of look at this concept of regional interdependence, which you commonly see, is the mobile, stable, mobile model. So joints are primarily designed to mobilize, to move, or to stabilize an area. And our body alternates between a mobile joint and a stable joint. We want a mobile ankle so we can have a stable knee, a mobile hip so we can have a stable lumbar spine. And the problems occur when we start having dysfunction in one of these regions, and we're making the adjacent joints have to do a job that they are not designed to do. So if our hip is not able to be mobile, for example, that means our knee is going to have to take on more of a job of mobility than stability. Our lumbar spine is going to have to take on more of that job as well. So now we're asking tissues that are not designed to move to do most of the movement because we've lost it somewhere else. That's where issues start to arise, and we start to see tissue degradation. We start to see overuse injuries because we're having tissues go under load that they certainly don't have the capacity to manage. So now that we've looked at how certain joints are meant to stabilize and others are meant to be mobile, we can connect that idea to something we call the 5 key physical capabilities of golf, right? The 5 things that you should be able to do for an efficient golf swing. Now, this isn't to say that you won't be able to swing if these break down, but we will distribute the stress somewhere else because of it. We're going to talk about them individually here. This is adapted from the Titleist Performance Institute, so those who have their TPI, this might be a little bit familiar to you, but I still think it's really valuable information and ties in well to this idea of regional interdependence and this idea of sharing the load in the body. So the first thing from a physical standpoint that we have to do is to be able to stabilize our core and control our pelvis. Now, this allows us to efficiently transfer force between the upper and lower body and prevents excessive stress on the lumbar spine. As we said before, the lumbar spine is more of a stabilizer, right? And our core muscles act as kind of guy wires like on a bridge, where creating proper stability and control keeps everything in line and prevents excessive undue motion. That excessive motion then causes repeated overuse injuries, and that's how we get to chronic low back pain in golfers. It's a very common thing that we see, and we'll talk more about that as we talk about pain patterns in golf later. The next key physical characteristic is their ability to dissociate the lower body from the upper body. This supports efficient rotation, supports efficient sequencing, as we know that at the top of our backswing, the first thing that has to go is our hips, right? And if we're not able to move our hips independent of our upper body, everything just swings together. So if we are not able to dissociate our lower from our upper body, then our trunk and our shoulders have to do a lot more work initiating that downswing and using it all as one kind of block. Now, what goes hand in hand in this is the ability to dissociate our upper body from our lower body. Again, this is very key in sequencing because the next thing to rotate after our pelvis is our thorax, and it supports that effective thoracic rotation if we're able to move this without the lumbar spine coming into play. This will be highlighted more in the warm-up sample we talk about a little bit later on in the presentation, but I just think it's an important concept that we're all on the same page for. As well, if we're able to effectively rotate through our thorax, then we have less stress on our hips and our lumbar spine because, again, they're not going to have to do that job. Kind of the inverse of that lower body dissociation that we just spoke about. Okay, moving on. The next key capability that we have to be able to do is be able to maintain our posture during movements of the arms. And that's not just to maintain a static posture. It's the dynamic posture of our pelvis, our hips, our lumbar spine, really everything from our ankles to our shoulders while we're moving our arms. You'll see a very common physical screen for this is that overhead squat you'll see people do. They'll take a dowel or a golf club and they'll push it over their head and do a squat. And this will be very telling because you'll see people dump their arms forward oftentimes because they're not able to maintain that position when their arms have to do some movement. You take their arms down, they can squat no problem, but once you push them up here, we see that becoming a repeated issue for a lot of golfers. Now, this is obviously very necessary when we're sequencing and transferring our force, but it's a very significant factor when it comes to controlling the club plane, consistently at least. The 3 things that are the biggest contributors to club plane control, as I'm sure a lot of you know, is our posture, our shoulders, and our wrists. And we'll talk a little bit about that at the next capability, but it's just a very important factor that's really not a technique thing more than a physical capability that we can see if people who are not even golfers don't have this ability sometimes or do, and that has a huge effect on performance. Because without that ability, we're not able to have a consistent delivery of that club face through impact. As well, when we do have the ability to maintain our posture during our movement, we have less compensation that occurs through our spine and our shoulders because everything is working the way it should. And finally, our last capability is our ability to hinge our wrists and set the club effectively. And again, as we said, this supports the transfer of energy from our pelvis through our torso, through our shoulders, into our hands and the club. We need to be able to manipulate that club from our wrists effectively. As I mentioned, it's a key contributor to club plane control. As you guys, I'm sure all know, I can control where the club is in my backswing. I can manipulate my wrist back and forth. I can turn my shoulder, or I can alter my posture. So understanding that we might have some of our golfers having these compensation patterns because they lose an aspect of one of these key physical capabilities, which then causes them to do something else in order to deliver that club play effectively, which then again overuses that and causes that cumulative load as we spoke about. A big thing when it comes to the wrist specifically, every time I hear a golfer have an elbow or a forearm issue, I'm going to look at the wrists, because oftentimes that lead elbow, when it's coming through, if we are not able to have a proper set of our wrists, we got a lot of chicken winging, we got a lot of being able to try to pull and manipulate the club this way, which puts a lot of undue stress on our flexors and extensors in our elbow. So when these capabilities aren't available, the body still swings, but it just redistributes that stress, as I've kind of alluded to a lot of what I've said already. If stress shifts these capabilities and we're not able to use them all, the next question is, how do we actually prepare the body to access all these capabilities before we golf? Now, that's where the concept of warm-up, load management, and recovery come into play a little bit more. Now, we're going to talk about a warm-up itself, why we warm up and what's the purpose of it. Now, the big thing about the warm-up, the first thing we have to understand, and the first principle that we'll talk a little bit more, is that we're actually trying to physically warm the body up. We're trying to increase blood flow and increase our tissue temperature, because that allows us to move more efficiently. It primes our central nervous system to actual fire a little bit better, and improves tissue compliability, the ability to, stretch and distend without overstretching. Typically you'll hear a cold muscle does not pull apart as effectively, and then you start to have those issues that come along later. As well, when we don't have a consistent warm-up, our bodies are at different levels of tension. We might not have the access to all of those capabilities as we had on another day, which makes it a lot harder to have a consistent, replicable golf swing day in and day out. I talked a little bit already about that durability and that resilience as we spoke about. Sorry, they're just yelling a lot right in the background here. It's a bunch of hockey players. Obviously, they get a little bit excited. So
I think you're the only one that can hear them, Doc.
Oh, is it just me? Because I hear it so loud that I'm giving pauses to wait for them to calm down. Because I think that you guys can hear it through my headphones. But apologies, everyone.
No, we can't hear a thing.
Okay, great. So the principles of an effective golf warm-up, what it should include. What it should do is it should gradually increase that body temperature, as we mentioned before. It should prepare the joints for a functional range of motion, being those joints should be able to move through those ranges and control and stabilize through them. That's that dynamic stability through that functional movement. So first we have to make sure that the joints can access that range of motion, and then we have to make sure that those joints can be stable through that range of motion. Finally, the last thing we do in a warm-up is we integrate movement, the timing, and control. We increase the speed, the amplitude of our swings to get us all the way through into that full golf swing that occurs. So I've alluded to some things, but the overview of what we want to include, first we're going to have that increase in tissue temperature with general movements, again, to help tissue compliance, force production, and load tolerance, as we mentioned before. Dynamic mobility, as we mentioned, is accessing functional ranges under control. And then the next thing we want to do is start to introduce rotational and separational patterns, which are starting to become a little bit more golf specific. So you see, we start to transition from general movements to things that become more and more golf specific. And we turn that into a gradual progression towards our full swing speed. So I want to just provide a sample warm up. I will go through it with you guys, show you something I like to incorporate, or I show a lot of golfers about, and kind of the elements that I spoke about, why that touches on them. So I'll step back for a second. Make sure you guys can all see me effectively. I'll kind of just demonstrate the few things that we're seeing here. Now, golf warm-ups aren't typically just static stretches. Again, we need to prepare the body for the demands we're about to do. The one stretch I do like to incorporate is a lat stretch. Our lat runs from our back down into the medial aspect of our arm. oftentimes a lot of people who don't have the ability to maintain posture, it's because that lat is so tight. And as we get up taut and we get full tension in our lat, we start to see some elbow bending because it gets caught right here at our humerus. We start to see some anterior pelvic tilting, which limits our rotational ability because it pulls on its insertion here on the thoracolumbar fascia. So I want to just start by kind of stretching that out, getting a little bit more compliance through that before we start general movements. So what I like to do with the golf club is I'll have golfers hold their club face, and I'll stick it up towards their armpit. And then what I'll have them do is side bend, feeling that stretch all the way through here. Typically, I'll have them hold it for 20 to 30 seconds. If we're looking for actual flexibility gains, that's more of a 30 to 60 second hold. But the reality is in a warm-up, we're not trying to build on something. That's what training is for. Warm-up is just to prime the body for what it's already able to do. So following that, I'll have golfers, hold the club in their hand, and we can work. Let's see if I can get better visuals here.
I wonder if you just go back to the spotlight view for just a second. Just close your PowerPoint for a second.
Is that better? Is that better?
Way better.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. Everyone still see me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, great. So, first one I wanted to go through was a calf raise. So, I'm going to bring that down a little bit. It's just a simple one. We're just rocking up, back and forth, just to get more blood flow and create more ankle mobility. From there, I like to move into mini squats. I'm doing more of an abridged version. Each one would do 5 to 10 reps of each one. Sitting back, priming that posterior chain. That's one as well. Oh, sorry, my computer's doing something a little funny.
Still good at our end.
Still good? Okay, sorry. It's been a little buggy today. My apologies. Another thing I like to incorporate some leg swings. So working in this, what we call the sagittal plane, getting that leg ready. We can also go across the frontal plane, moving this way. This is more adduction and abduction versus flexion and extension. I like to move into some openers and closures of the gait, starting to facilitate a little bit of hip rotation on each side. Trying to do that without moving our lumbar spine too much. I like to also incorporate things like arm circles, starting small, palms down, generally working bigger and bigger till we have full range. And then we go palms up, we'll work the other direction. Again, this will take longer. This is more for demonstration purposes, and we're not going to all get up and do a warm-up right now. So this is really just to show you what all those exercises look like. Getting to a little bit more of those key capabilities. One of the next things I'll work into that I really like is I'll have the club in front of me, and I'll push my hips back into a hip hinge. And then from there, I'm just going to pelvic tilt forward and backwards. I'll tell patients, pretend that your pelvis is a bowl of water and we're going to dump it out and tuck it under us. This is working on that ability to control our pelvis through our core. From there, I'll sit my hips back. I'll bring that club across my chest, maintaining that golf posture, and I'll try to work into some thoracic rotation, trying to dissociate that upper and lower body from each other. Trying to work back and forth in this direction. We can then progress this into a step and reach. I'm sure you've all seen this before. Here, and then when I'm here, what I really want to do is turn my belt buckle into this hip first. Then I get my thorax moving with it. Next comes my shoulders, my head. And we come back into the middle. And we switch sides. First comes the belt buckle. Again, trying to dissociate, getting that belt buckle turned first while this stays straight. Then I'm turning across. I still rotate through until I'm fully done, and then I uncoil. I'm going to go back and forth in this direction. And so on and so forth. The final one I'll do before I start to incorporate into the swing itself is I'll start kind of an exaggerated golf posture, and I'll do these kind of cable shots from low to high. And from here, what I'm trying to do is I start pretty slow. I'm getting a little bit of chest turn. I'm working my shoulders slightly down. Start to do this while you look at other people and talk. But what I'm trying to do is I'm starting to slowly increase the speed and amplitude of these movements. And the last thing I'll do is I start into the swing progression. The first thing you want to do is a half swing, we progress to a 3/4, and then to our full swing. Now, when it comes to speed is going to show us the way that our body's moving. The faster we move, all of those compensation patterns are going to start to show up more and more. So what we want to do is really start slow, make sure it looks good, and then we keep progressing upwards. The biggest thing is speed will always be a, what's the right word for it?
Killer.
Speed will always be a predictor. It'll always, it will show all of your flaws. It'll be a magnifying glass to all of those things. So we want to start slow, make it look good before we start to expose ourselves that way. I'm going to reshare my screen here. And let me open this back up.
Perfect.
Okay, still here? Great. Okay. So moving on to the idea of training volume and load management. We hear that a lot in basketball. Oh, he's on load management. He's not playing today. But it applies to really every sport because the load that we have, again, once it exceeds that tissue capacity is where we get injury. So earlier we did talk about the concept of tissue overload conceptually. This slide is starting to show what that looks like in the real world in terms of golf, right? Things like practice volume, the intensity, and the frequency in which we train very much impact the load. Things like, we have a golf session with our coach, then we include a speed training session, then we get out for a round with our friends, then we actually have a competitive round, and all these things stack up to create the total load that's going on. What I really wanted to highlight in that bottom graph you're seeing there, you can see training load versus time. These big spikes you see, this sudden increase in volume or intensity of training is where you see the biggest increases of injury. In the business, we call it too much too soon, kind of colloquially. We always say that that's the big thing that occurs because our body's actually able to handle consistent load really well. It's when we have these random spikes and increases is where we start to see those breakdowns occur. And that's why golf injuries are typically cumulative because you get this spike and you see, things start to overload. That tissue capacity comes down a little bit. We keep going, we get another spike. And that takes less and less of a spike, as I showed in that earlier slide, to then exceed our capacity. Next, I wanted to talk about kind of the warning signs and the red flags of injury. So when it comes to an injury, especially in golf, especially these overuse things we've been speaking about, truly, pain is usually not the first sign you see. The first thing you're going to see is a drop in performance. That means they're no longer having the same club speed typically. You start to spray the ball a little bit more. You don't have that same consistency that you've usually had. You start to see technique breakdowns, or you start to see increased need for recovery, where your golfers can not go with the same frequency they used to. They need more breaks in between in order to function properly. Some things that we see that are indications, so after that performance breakdown and we actually start to see pain, those early indications are symptoms, that's what SX is, that linger over 24 to 48 hours or progressively worsen, right? People get sore after a round of golf. I know I've had my buddies want to play, 3 rounds in a day, and yeah, of course I'll be sore after that. But if that persists and gets worse, then I'm starting to raise some eyebrows, start to see, all right, something's wrong, I need to address. Another thing too is that recurring symptoms in the same area are usually an indication that an injury is going to occur, where it's not rare that just the general soreness of exercise and activity always manifests in one spot. That means we're either really overtraining that one thing or an injury is around the corner. So as coaches, an important thing to recognize is seeing this, we should be able to modify our load, modify the frequency at which they're training so that we can limit the actual injuries that occur and then mitigate that time off that could happen. the best injury I always say is the one that you never get. So being able to be proactive instead of reactive to these injuries is a way that we can, as I said before, keep golfers on the course and not in the clinic. Now, I want to talk a little bit about common injury patterns that we see diagnosed across golfers. Oftentimes, they tend to cluster into these same kind of regions. So we see the low back, the hips, the shoulders, elbows, and wrists are commonly the most affected areas. Now, this isn't because golf is inherently dangerous per se, but it's how stress is distributed, and based on those key characteristics, we start to see these areas become the biggest problems because they tend to become the focal point for a lot of stress. Where again, if your hip is not rotating properly, then your lumbar spine is going to come into play. If we're not able to stabilize and dissociate our upper spine and our lower spine, our hip is going to take the brunt of that force. If our wrist can't properly hinge, that lead elbow is going to be a big problem coming through impact. So again, as I said, the issue becomes when certain joints can't contribute effectively, then that load becomes redistributed, and then usually these are kind of our main culprits here. Recognizing these patterns helps shift the focus away from kind of the isolated body parts toward the movement system as a whole, because we can recognize, oh, that low back pain is occurring, and we don't think, oh, well, it's something inherently wrong with the low back itself. We can look above and below that and see where those other breakdowns are occurring. Now, this isn't to say that the coaches have to become clinicians and you guys have to clinically break this down. It's just something to consider and something that you can include in certain programming and how you're looking at what your golfers are complaining about sometimes. Now, one of the last few kind of concepts I want to introduce is recovery and tissue capacity. So we talked about that tissue capacity is what is inherent to tissues, and when load exceeds it, that's when injury occurs. And now that concept of capacity is not one that you build during a session. It's what's built in between the sessions, because recovery is what builds that capacity. And thus that recovery itself influences our performance and our risk of injury because we don't want to have that load exceed it. I really like this graphic because it shows, yes, we have this capacity, we do too much too soon, we get that overload and we get that injury. But we also see this other one where our load is the same, but our capacity is what's reduced. And when we lose that capacity is when injury occurs anyway. The ideal scenario is when load and capacity meet perfectly, allows for perfect adaptation, progressive and effective overload where we're actually just creating strength through our tissues and not causing injury and running ourselves down into the ground. So when we have that fatigue, when we lose that capacity in the tissue, that's going to affect how we distribute the load in our body. So when we get really tired, we start to see, oh yeah, when I get tired, I come up out of my stance. Or so, you'll hear people say, oh, when I get tired, I come more over the top. Sometimes that's a technique thing and a mental fatigue where they're not thinking of the proper sequence they should be performing. But many times you also see that it's because although they still have the right thoughts in mind, the body can't effectively distribute the load the way it should be, the way it effectively and efficiently is designed to. Another idea that comes into work when I work in basically any athletic population, you always have people who think, oh, if I do more of this, I'm going to get better. No matter what, the more is always the better. If I, hit 100 balls a day, every single day, and I do my speed training, it's all going to compound and stack properly. But the reality is not always the case. More work doesn't always create better adaptation, mainly because of this issue of running ourselves into the ground, right? Where we're doing so much without that proper recovery, where we never have the time for our tissues to build back the way they should. Recovery should be programmed into every athletic kind of endeavor and treated almost like its own training session, because at least in my opinion, it's as important. Because without the proper recovery, we don't restore what we need to and come back stronger. We come back weaker. Every time we do a training session, we want to end up better in some way. But if we never allow that recovery to occur, our body can't properly adapt and put us in that right position. The one thing I always talk about with all my patients is addressing the low-hanging fruit of recovery. And that big three is sleep, nutrition, and stress. So sleep itself is, I think, probably the number one thing. Then that supports tissue repair, regulation of the nervous system, as well as motor learning and adaptation. If we do lessons and we do train and we change our mechanical patterns, that sleep is actually what's helping to affirm that. And that's a lot of science I wouldn't have time to get into today. Hydration and nutrition, I would say, are an important one that come almost hand in hand with sleep, because what nutrition is allowing is it provides the building blocks for tissues in our body to lay down things thicker. Many people know that when we go to the gym, when we exercise, we create micro tears in our muscle. That micro tear is then repaired with new proteins and new muscle fibers, which then create a bigger muscle. But if we keep working out, we don't have any of the building blocks, we don't have any bricks of the house, we can't ever stack anything up. All we're doing is wearing it down. Finally, we talk about stress. Now, psychological stress counts as load even when it's not physical. This has a huge impact in our sleep, in, again, our mental health, as we said before. And when it's compromised, we see that tissue capacity quickly drops. It's something that I'm often screening for. I ask every patient, how many hours of sleep are you getting at night? How much food are you getting? Are you eating good whole foods? How much of that? Are we eating adequate nutrition? In the athletic populations, you're actually surprised that undernutrition is a lot of the problem. In more of our general population, it's more about not eating the proper things, not providing our body with nutrients our body can actually use to then build up kind of those breakdowns. And I always talk, what's our stress levels like? What do we do at work? How do we manage our stress? Because those are things that impact pain perception and sensitivity and our recovery in general. So this is kind of the crux, what I want you to be able to take away and apply to your coaching practice themselves. Where if you take nothing, I want just to at least be this slide, where as coaches, you guys have a bit of a duty to not just manage the swing mechanics, but it depends on your level of involvement with these golfers, but you have to also manage the total load. You have to be considering, is what I'm prescribing too much or not enough to create adaptation, but especially being wary of overloading and then causing golfers to have to miss time, which is only going to be a negative detriment. That includes avoiding sudden spikes, avoiding that too much too soon, and being mindful that if we're going to add extra sessions, we're going to have to take something else away to not overload the body too much. We can have small increases in load, and our body's able to tolerate that well, but we have that quick spike, that's when we start to see those injuries occur. Now, again, something to monitor above pain for coaches is performance and how they recover. Now, your job isn't to be a clinician for them and diagnose their problems and things like that, but I think everyone has a role in terms of supporting golfers' health and well-being, and everyone that works in athletic spheres should at least have some awareness or consciousness of this. So again, as we talked about before, when we see those dips in performance, that might be some times to talk about, and maybe taking a rest day. Maybe let's prioritize sleep today instead of getting those extra range session in, because sometimes that's as valuable, if not more valuable, than that time on the range or course. Again, when we structure our training, we should have tissue capacity in mind, because overloading that capacity is how we get to injury. And small adjustments that we make early can prevent bigger problems later. Sorry about that typo, everyone. But if we make those small adjustments to their load, the small adjustments to what's getting overloaded, we can limit that gradual progressive onset of injuries where we're not creating that spike later. That is my gist. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to me and taking time out of your day. And I would love to open up to have some discussion, some Q&A, and see if we can have some discourse about this. I will unshare my screen and maybe we can chat some more. Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, that was excellent.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Stop share. There we go. Oh, yeah.
Top shelf.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, for us members that are out there, I am just truly blessed and grateful that Dr. Andrew looked me up and checked me out last fall. And other than me overloading him with my aches and pains, he is a very, very insightful, well-educated, as you've heard, spoken young man who has just such a vast knowledge of human mechanics and anatomy and physiology. And I can tell you from myself personally, having a background in all of this, from many, many years ago, I feel like I'm back there with Fred and Barney in the Flintstone era, and how Dr. Andrew has really, really turned my lights on to why and probably how I got to the state that I'm in. Um, as I shared a little bit of a LOL back there when you're talking about stability, mobility chains. Yeah, my hip bone wasn't connected to my knee bone, and my knee bone wasn't connected to my ankle bone. So yeah, I think there's some really, really good information there. And the key word he used was awareness, that we have to be aware of what we're doing and how we're doing it, when we're doing it, know why we're doing it, be in good communication with the golfer in front of you, asking them how they're feeling. Does this hurt? Are you hurting? Um, get to understand how they're moving and how they're grooving, and make sure that load management is key, not only for your golfers, but for you, us golf teaching professionals. We spend long, long days standing, twisting and turning and, doing the repetitive motion, and it has an accumulative effect. So I just want everybody to really, really be aware when you're looking at your calendar for the upcoming season. Make sure you take some breaks. Make sure you get hydrated. Make sure you eat well, um, and keep fit.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. I'm seeing a few, it looks like hand raises in the audience here. I don't know how you guys want to manage that. I can field questions and talk about that. Or if Mark or Jeff, you wanted to lead the charge, I'm happy to do either one.
Well, I think
Looks like Shields has a
go ahead,
question.
Jill.
All right. Are you listening when I'm talking? Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Sound is okay. Okay.
Yep, I'm just trying to find you. Oh, here you go. Yep.
I was wondering, what is the average of the pro are hitting ball when they're not playing, and when they playing tournament during in the tournament, off tournament, how many ball a day? We heard 1,000 ball a day. Is it true? I know VJ Singh was like the more craziest guy on the tour, who's hitting more and more, and how he survived to that. Do you have some tips, or I don't know? Can you share your experience about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question. An answer that has come up a lot when it comes to musculoskeletal health in general and a lot of things in the world of sports is it depends. So capacity is not something that is the same across all people, right? So some golfers have become used to a certain consistent load while others have not. Now, the exact numbers, I'm not going to lie to you and say I have in front of me because there is a huge variability. When I was working on different PGA Tour America events and things like that, you would see some guys show up, do kind of a shorter bridge routine, hit maybe one bag of balls. You see some guys who would hit all morning long, or they would do their whole round and then they get in again after that and keep going and going. So the average number I won't say I have. And the reality is that there's not one answer that this is the golden number, the golden ratio. It depends on every person. Everyone responds a little differently, and everyone is used to different loads. It's truly what you find that ends up working for you or for your golfer, where some golfers feel comfortable after hitting 30 range balls and they call it a day. Some people want to hit 200 plus to feel comfortable before a round, and then they want to do practice after. There's not really one magic number. When it comes to a lot of things in the world of volume, training volume, when it comes to an exercise itself, I will typically prescribe a certain amount of reps, right? It's pretty transferable. So I'll use this example. When I'm using, I'm providing a rehab or therapeutic exercise, I will say, okay, I want you to do this many reps in one set because that accomplishes a goal. If I'm trying to do power or strength or endurance or what have you. But now the sets, I'll give a guiding range, but I kind of equate it almost to a pharmaceutical where there's a therapeutic dose that is different for every person. And some people will underdose and they won't get any effect. Some people will overdose and have a negative effect. That'll look like change in your flexibility if you underdose, or increased pain if you're overdosing it, right? But the reality is that that's different from person to person. I explain that to every single one of my patients and every one of my athletes, where that for this person, you might need to do this 3 times a day for it to be effective for you. But for this person, you might have to do it 5 or 6. The key is finding that dose for you, for that golfer, for that person that works for them, where they're not seeing those signs of overload and overuse, but they're still seeing adaptations and progressions in their game. So it's a great question, and I wish I had just the magic number of, oh, this is the number of swings. I wish I had the tour average in front of me as well, to be honest, but I don't have that number. But the reality is you're going to see a very skewed range. I saw there was one golfer who showed up, I think hit one ball with 7 or 8 clubs and called it a day and then went out to the round. So, you'll have such a variety where even if you have that average, you have these outliers that will make such a huge difference, where I focus on the individual golfer, the individual patient, because the reality is it's very individualistic, because everybody's tissues are going to have certain amount of load that they adapt to and that they overload to. So it's really whether they used to, and if it's not creating the benefit they want, we progress it further. If it's causing those signs of overuse, we need to scale it back. So really using that as a guiding principle and a framework more than a hard and fast rule of this number, I think is really important. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, but when we're considering putting and chipping, it's less stressful on the body than full swing. Yeah, we still stand up over the ball, but it's less stressful. So I don't know if they calculate this number of putting and chipping through the number that I heard. It was like 1,000 ball for many pro. So I don't know if they calculate this amount too, or I did for myself already a couple very big training, like 1,000 full swing in one day, couple of days in a row. I know my body was stiff, but after a few days, I get some kind loose, and I'm very comfortable hitting 300 to 500 ball a day for myself. I don't know, but just full swing. So
yeah, absolutely. I think that's fantastic, because that as you said before, for myself, right? Because that's what you are comfortable with and doing. And again, none of these things are guaranteed, where if you are comfortable hitting 300 to 500 and you have one day where you hit 1,000, that doesn't mean every time you're going to get yourself an injury. It's just these are the things that predispose you to it and things we can look out for. So it's not necessarily saying if you do this every time you're going to get an injury, because there's plenty of examples where that doesn't occur, but the research does show us that is what increases our likelihood or susceptibility to it. I hope that helps to kind of rectify
Right.
what you're saying.
And if I just interject here, I think just again, having been looked after by Dr. Andrew, I don't do a lot of reps and sets, but I can tell you they are very specific. So to go back to what you're suggesting, Gilles, is specificity of training is important too. It's just not being a ball beater. What's your purpose for going to the range? What are you working on? It shouldn't take you hundreds and hundreds of balls. I think you're not training properly if you're not getting it and you're not making an improvement. Then you are just risking yourself for injury. personally.
Yeah, but like wedges, mid iron, long iron, hybrids, fairway woods, driver. If you go like just like 50 or 60 ball each, you're close to 300, 500, So it's going fast. So if you let's say myself, I say I want to have like 10 or 15 ball in that range, let's say 150 yards. I want to be at like 15 feet around that flag. So when I get 20, I don't count it. So until I get the number, I don't
Well,
stop.
that's way inside tour average, man.
Yeah,
That's way
it's an
inside tour
example.
average. 15 feet from 150 yards?
That's
Oof.
an example,
Yeah, but
So,
that's unrealistic,
yeah. It depends your goal and
right?
what you expect of yourself. It's
I
okay.
Yeah,
think all
well,
of it, I think ultimately, if I can interject here, that a lot of this conversation is it depends. And we can probably spend a lot of time talking about every single golfer on this call and say, well, how many balls do you hit? How many balls do you hit? But the reality is it depends on that person. You find that amount that you can consistently tolerate. And you have to just be mindful of those times where when you go up and you hit a lot more, you know, you need to modify things around that. So for example, I'm sure that day that you hit 1,000 balls probably took a little bit easier on the day after, at least I would hope. But again, there's so many of these factors that are golfer and patient dependent, where I think
right.
that it becomes a little bit about talking about the semantics. It becomes a bit pedantic when we're talking about ultimately that if we're going to talk about the specific numbers and things like that, because it's more of a conceptual basis that I'm trying to present more than
Yeah.
this is the rule that you must follow exactly. With
Okay.
that being said, sorry, Jeff, I was going to address a question in the comments, unless
Yeah.
anyone want to keep talking further on this.
No, no, I was going to get to the next question there.
Great. So I was going to see the comment one. I can't see everyone at once, so apologize if I'm skipping around. But one question we see is, I feel for me anyway, is that the one issue is finding the appropriate health professional that will really help with one's physical well-being. What is your recommendation on this?
Right.
So when it comes to health professionals that are help with physical well-being, if we're going to talk about this in the scope of musculoskeletal, your muscles, your joints, and your bones, the typical professionals you're going to see are going to be chiropractors like myself, physiotherapists, athletic therapists. Rarely you'll see occupational therapists. They're not really in this field. Even osteopaths. And there's a few things that I kind of think are really important when you're picking someone that is going to help with your physical well-being and you're trying to find the right healthcare professional for you. Some things that you have to look at are their model of care and their experience, and as well as how much you get along with them. Because ultimately, if you don't like this person, it doesn't matter how good they are, you're probably not going to get too much of a beneficial therapeutic relationship. But I think the important thing to kind of recognize is that people have different mentalities and different kind of viewpoints at which they look at this lens through, and you have to find one that resonates with you. So for example, my mentality and my model of care that I provide as a healthcare professional is my care consists of active and passive care. Passive care is the manual therapies, the soft tissue work, the joint mobilization and manipulation, the acupuncture, the shockwave therapy, the TENS machines, whatever have it. And the active care is the exercises, the rehab, the cardiovascular fitness, and things like that. I always say passive care is what I do to you, active care is what you do for you. And my model is that the passive care gets you out of pain and moving through a better range of motion to allow you to do that active care easier, because you can do it without pain. You can do it through a deeper range, which then helps to keep that kind of therapeutic window that we created in the passive care open. So that's my model. That's what I explain to my patients. Those that resonate stay along with me and typically get better, not to toot my own horn, but those that don't, find someone that they resonate with their model. So I can't sit here and say this is the best way of practicing healthcare, because that's what it is for me. And that's what resonates with me, and that's how I see results. You'll see people doing different things, and if that resonates for you or your athlete, that's a good way of going about it. A good thing is having an open and honest conversation, to really think that healthcare professionals are just people too, who are doing a job that, most of their job is to help and take care of people. They want to have that talk. They want to have the conversation. And if it feels like they're really selling you something, it's because they probably are. That's at least my thoughts on it. And, you know, if anyone else has one to share, I'd be happy to hear it. But that's at least my recommendation. I hope that answers that question. Elaine, I believe, or Alan?
Yeah, Alain, that was good.
Alan.
Yeah,
Lovely.
great response there. Yeah. It's much like
Yeah.
developing a rapport with your, your students or your students with their golf pro. They're not liking what they're getting, then they're going to move on. Right? So it's all about creating open communications, being open and honest, um, letting people know how you're doing or not doing or what your concerns are. But like I tried to say earlier, I've been sort of had this background for a long time, and I've had numerous injuries and joint replacements, and I can tell you I've had a lot of different physios and chiros, and I am just blessed to have found this young man.
Appreciate it, Jeff. Thank
I
you.
feel like he's the light at the end of my tunnel.
Oh, he's just pumping up my tires.
Yeah, well, no, truly, I'm very grateful.
Good for you too, Jeff. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here. I think this is awesome.
Yeah.
I'm seeing another hand up from Derek, it is.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me, Dr. Andrew?
Yep, that's great.
A lot of my students tend to be, I'm going to say seniors. They tend to range in age, approximately, the majority of them tend to range in age from about age 50 on. My oldest student is a very lovely lady who's almost 90 years old. So
Amazing.
I'm always concerned teaching a golf swing or trying to help them improve their game. Inevitably, every single one of these people have some issue with lower back, osteoarthritis, history of back pain, shoulder pain. I mean, as you age, it's a natural process of aging. This is a pretty athletic move. So I'm always worried about trying to teach them or ask them to do something that's outside of their capabilities or limits and potentially, I don't want to cause further injury. So I'm very cautious about this, but can you give us any advice or give me any advice on things I should absolutely avoid or things I should maybe focus on more for people that tend to have reduced range of motions, just as an age of living, and they have lower physical capabilities, but I want to at the same time help them maybe get a little more distance or accuracy, but without causing them to be in pain the next day?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And I think that's what I appreciate, that it's very much, your golfer at the center of this. That's what you care the most about, them not being in pain and them having that longevity in this. The one thing that I'm going to say is that in terms of things to absolutely avoid, there's not many things, especially in reputable, well-represented golf professionals like yourselves, to absolutely avoid. I know that you guys aren't doing anything that is, you're not making them do crazy rotational movements. Obviously, things that are beyond the capability of a young golfer should be avoided, but that should be avoided for all golfers. In terms of that population, there's no hard thing to absolutely avoid, but there are certain considerations. Now, the first consideration is that a very common thing, and I'd say at this point kind of a natural point of aging, is some sort of hip degeneration. That's what I see the most in kind of the older golfers I see. And when you have osteoarthritis of your hip, the first range of motion they teach you that you always lose is hip internal rotation. So that's something that you have to be mindful of. And obviously there's ways to get around it, where if you know that in mind, that most people aren't able to actually really move through that hip, then there's ways that we can flare the leg to allow for better range, things like that. Those kind of little modifiers. That low back pain often comes from the fact that hip isn't moving. We spoke about this before, right? The stable mobile. We lose the mobility in the hip. That lumbar spine that's supposed to be stable is now taking the job of mobility, which is not designed to do, right? Which is why you see that such a common occurrence. So it's a good question to say what you should absolutely avoid. And again, I don't love using this answer. When I was a student, I hated hearing all the time was, it depends. But each patient has something a little bit different, or each golfer. So when I say, that's a funny comment there, Alan, but when I say most people, for example, that are getting older have some hip degeneration. That's not always true for everybody. So if we're making that recommendation across the board, we're going to kind of put people in a bucket that don't necessarily deserve to be there. My biggest recommendation is truly where I come into the play, where professionals like myself should be involved. Our role, my role isn't to show a golfer how to swing and get better and get technique. My role is to create the best environment in their body to do the physical capabilities and provide tweaks and modifiers when those aren't possible. So I think having a management team is so important, especially in that population that have those certain considerations. Where I think that those who are experiencing pain with golf, or are a little bit older, for example, will oftentimes have someone or should have someone in that kind of healthcare musculoskeletal realm, where at least in my end, it should be an open communication where I say, look, I'm seeing this person for this issue. These are the things that we should be avoiding. I don't give sweeping declarative things for any population or people, because there's some people who are 80 plus who have fantastic hips, so maybe that's not exactly the thing that we need to be addressing. There's things that very much matter. There's different demographics of people have different, for example, acetabulums or hip socket orientations, which changes how you move. If we have something that just across the board is a statement, then we neglect some of those people and might make recommendations for them that will do more harm than good. So my recommendation more than anything is having conversations with those healthcare providers in their circle of care. Because at this point, as a golf instructor, you're part of that circle of care, because that's part of the mechanical movements that fall into what we all care about here. What I care about, what you guys care about. So if they're experiencing pain and having issues and they're not seeing someone, I recommend having someone on your roster that is a good communicator, that can have that kind of open discourse back and forth about your golfers and patients, and having that source of referral between them. And if not, the thing to really just understand for any tissue and body adaptation is that your body adapts to the loads you put on it, but putting too much of that load can break the capacity. So starting with small amounts of that load, again, even if it's the smallest thing, is generally safe. And if you have, a 90-year-old golfer, for example, and they've been golfing for a long time, they do have some element of resilience. People are less fragile than people believe. So even starting with small things that help improve their speed and working up to things like that are ways that we don't have those spikes. Again, that all comes down to the worried is introducing something that would cause a spike in the load that goes beyond their capacity. But doing it gradually, being mindful of recovery, acknowledging that the older population needs a little bit more time for recovery, potentially between sessions, for example, are ways that we can help mitigate those issues a little bit.
Yeah, totally agree. Thank you. That was great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. That was a great one.
Top notch.
Yeah, in the comments, absolutely. I say, you can find out if there's restrictions, limitations, or injuries. And I truly think that all of us in this world of sports, when it comes from a healthcare perspective, a fitness perspective, a technique or performance perspective, I think that we're all a team ultimately, and we all bring something to the table. And I think that it's important that we recognize the areas that we have some small overlaps, but also the things that are outside our domains. And that's where we lean on each other for. Where if I know that a golfer it's something wrong with the swing mechanic, I'm not going to go again and try to fix it. I'm going to fix what's in my domain and what's in my scope. And then that's the, golf instructor's thing. If I think that someone just needs to work on their, oblique strength, that's their golf fitness instructor's job. That's their personal trainer's role. So we might have some overlap and put our feet in different pools, but ultimately I think it's important to stay in our domains and work as a team, because that's what's best for all of these patients, athletes, golfers, whatever you want to call
100%. Yeah.
Well,
I'm trying to
just give you some feedback. This is the largest group we've had on in a long time. No.
Oh my goodness. Well, that makes me very happy to hear.
Yeah, we had up to 32 people before the questions started. So
incredible.
A lot more people out here.
Yeah, a lot of
Oh,
people, and I'm getting texts of how great a job you've done. So
thank you guys. That really means a lot to me. I
oh, you've done
really
wonderful.
put some time into this, so I really appreciate you guys because we're all
That's
interns.
wrong.
I
Yeah.
appreciate you guys being so receptive of it, and I really appreciate this kind of discussion we're having so far. Yeah, is there any other questions? I'm not seeing any more hands up, but I think everything in the chat's been mentioned. I don't
Not
want to
at
miss
all.
anyone.
That's good.
Unmute.
I'm on. Had a great presentation. Sorry, I had to run and get somebody into my other sim there. I just wanted to say, like, awesome job. And
Thank you.
the balance, sometimes we don't really give, it ties back to something you said much earlier in the presentation, but sometimes the overload isn't just physical, right? It's overload mental. So even if somebody is working through something and they want to put in a little bit more reps or a little bit more time and we're in a lesson and we're working with them, or even if they're on their own and they're kind of following the practice plan that we've sort of developed together, there's days, and I think Jack Nicklaus said this, sometimes he might hit 100 balls, he might hit 50 balls, he might hit 300 balls, but when he hit one that was the best one he's going to hit, he just walked off the range. He just left. He's like, that could have been 7 balls in, but he's like, I'm not going to hit a better one today. And then he would just leave. Now it might take him
Yeah.
150 to get there, but the mental side, sometimes if we get tired mentally, now we start making, like you said that earlier, it can affect how you're going to then physically move, or your functional movement changes just because mentally your focus is off or whatever. So it might not even be a physical issue that restricts you or puts you into a position where you can have some other bigger issues. So I just want to say
Absolutely.
thank you, because we all think, so not us necessarily as teachers, but everybody, golfers, thinks it's just physical. Oh, I got tired. That's why. So, but maybe you're mentally tired. Maybe you're emotionally not invested, right?
Absolutely.
Maybe it was just like there's other stuff going on. You even mentioned that earlier. So I just want to say thank you. I'm a little biased. I did a year of chiropractic college myself, so I'm very
Right on.
happy that we have a chiro here. But I think sometimes we don't look at holistically enough, and everybody always focuses a little too much on the physical because we're kind of doing a physical pursuit. So thank you. I just wanted to say thank you because it was very important for us to hear that there's other causes of that too, not just the physical.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you echoing that. So thank you for saying that as well, because yeah, absolutely. Even from in the course of a round, I've seen it firsthand. You see how someone performs when they're feeling good and at their peak versus when they're down in the mud a little bit, so to speak. Even from see how someone swings after a great shot versus after not as good of a one. You see that difference oftentimes. And that mental load is huge, especially when it's such a coordinated, robust movement as the golf swing. It takes a lot of control and it takes a lot of focus. That focus is huge. Something that actually Jeff and I work on a lot is the sequencing of having a consistent kind of mental routine beyond the physical shot routine. Where what Jeff has actually helped me a lot with, show it to him, is it's looking down the plane, I look back, I take a breath, and then I swing, like every time. And it's creating it's not about what I'm physically setting up as, although it does help me set my head right. It does help from the mental side. I'm always swinging from a place of calm, keeps my tempo right, which helps with just all of that, as you were saying before. So absolutely, really great point. Thank you. I think I saw another hand. I don't know if it's still up as I was scrolling. Oh, we got two hands. Okay,
Yeah, Greg.
Go ahead, Greg. And then I think I'm gonna have someone next.
All right, thanks. Great presentation, Andrew. This is really good. We are the Canadian Golf Teachers Federation, so cold weather golf is something many of our golfers and we have to adapt to. And I think it's, common sense would probably tell us cold weather is, has its influence on injuries and things like that. So I wanted to see if you could explain that a little bit further, like how much more susceptible are we in cold weather, or our golfers, to take on an injury? If we have pre-existing injuries, how much more susceptible are we to aggravate them? And if this is, something that you feel is occurs, how might you adjust your warm-up routine or your stretching routine to accommodate for cold weather golf?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic question. Thanks, Greg. So, as Canadians, we've had to do a lot of our physical activity in the cold. I definitely grew up doing a lot of that myself. And I'm the team therapist for Burlington Soccer Club. and they decided this year to do their training outdoors, which, as you can imagine, was a lot of uproar, but through the winter. And what I told them, which I'll kind of echo here, is that tissue temperature is truly the biggest thing. We don't call it a warm up just because that's a name. We call it because we're physically trying to warm up the tissues. We're trying to warm up, your muscles, your joints, your nervous system, your connective tissues, because that creates more of that compliability, right? You take a cold rubber band and stretch it, it'll snap a lot quicker than if you take a warm rubber band, you'll see it pull apart. That key kind of factor is why we care about the temperature and the cold weather and things like that. Because the cold weather does exactly that. It creates a decrease in temperature in your working tissues. And it's that same rubber band analogy is what can occur. So the things that I would do to modify for that, and what I told, these soccer players, I think also can translate pretty well to this, is don't have a lot of idle time. So in the warm-up, I would say the biggest thing is increasing more of those blood flow, tissue temperature activities, those light squats, those general movements. Maybe do a little bit more walking as you get ready for your practice at the range. But in general, a lot of time just standing around decreases your tissue temperature and allows that cold to affect you more. So people think that a warm-up only occurs at the beginning and that's it. No, warm-up only occurs every time your tissues aren't warm enough to perform the task. So if you're, for example, walking the course, that's going to help increase that tissue temperature more than taking the cart. If you are going to be on the cart, doing some of those warm-up criteria or those things that you were doing before you get to the swing. Maybe while you're waiting on the tee box, you're doing some mini squats. You're picking your legs up a little bit. You're doing it quietly, obviously, out of respect, but it takes no noise just to do some calf raises and move that way, right? So it's a warm-up. The big misconception is the warm-up only occurs at the beginning and then you don't need it. That's if you're having constant physical activity that keeps your tissues warm. But if you're going to be something like golf where you have a lot of stop and start, maintaining that warmth is something that we should be cognizant of to limit the actual cool down of our tissues, which then results in, more of that tearing, more of that pulling apart the cold rubber band. Hope that answers the question.
It does. Thank you very much. And I'm sure having golf partners you can snuggle with might help too.
That usually helps. Yeah.
Thanks.
I will let maybe like Mark and Jeff, if you guys want to be the ones to kind of call on the next question, because I can't see everybody, so I don't know where the hands are.
Gilles the only one waiting.
Okay, great. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. For let's say January, like we are now. So what you will suggest after a long season, it's like training strength, and after speed, maybe in March, starting training speed in March, or doing speed and strength during the winter. Is there a suggestion that you have?
In terms of, periodization of that training? Yeah. So that's a good question. And I like to have everything training consistently. And, you might have someone come up and say, oh, this is the best way of doing it. A disclaimer is I'm not a certified strength and conditioning specialist. I'm a chiropractor, and while I do have a lot of experience helping with rehab and facilitating strength and conditioning, there's not one protocol that I have is the best, in my opinion. The one that I typically go to is a combination. The way I kind of think about it, at least, is what actually is strength, what is power, what is speed, right? Strength is just how heavy of a thing can I lift? How much force can I produce, right? And power is how much force can I produce relative to how fast I can do it, right? I think that power is such a huge integral part of golf. And then comes speed, which is how fast I can do it. So you have strength, you have speed, you have power here. I think that working all of them kind of primes things constantly. But if I had to choose and do it one by one, I would do strength, then I would do power, then I would do speed, because you have that logical flow. Or you can even do it in reverse of that. I typically like doing things strong and slow, and then make it strong and faster, because that's, I think, you create a good base, and then you build on top of that based on your existing strength. But, some people might have different opinions. That's just at least my opinion on it.
I appreciate. Thank you.
Of course.
Oh, sorry. Can I go ahead?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I just thought maybe. No. I thought somebody else was talking there. Okay. So one of the things, if you could maybe comment on this, Doctor, if you could do that. We all kind of have 100% of our functional movement in a golf swing. That may be a different amount for everybody, but everybody has their 100%. So how much you can rotate in the backswing and how much you can get through on the, whether that's X amount of degrees or Y amount of degrees, everybody sort of has their 100%. And your brain and body know kind of where your 100% is.
Mhm.
Now, functional movement wise, we also know that different parts of your body should constitute different amounts of that percent.
Mhm.
So, for example, your knees might do 27%, your quads, hams, glutes, and core might do 58%, and then your arms are only doing and thoracic might only be doing whatever the numbers are, the numbers are. But
Mhm.
if your brain knows where 100% is and you start to have a breakdown in one of the areas physically, your brain is going to try to still get to 100%. And it will
Yes.
recruit another part of your body to make up the lack of something else. And this is where I think sometimes we should be watching that a lot more. Even if we're not trained in that area, we can kind of tell if they use a little too much arms to make up for a lack of mobility or stability in a different part of their body. Because all your brain and body are trying to do is get to the 100%, whatever your 100% amount is in your swing. It's different for
Mhm.
everybody, but your 100% is your 100%. So I think the long term and even the initial, like the acute injury, can happen when we start to recruit other things. And I don't know if you've seen a lot of that. And I just wanted to ask if that kind of that analogy of thinking like it's a kinetic chain and everything has a certain amount of responsibility. It is not 100% arms. It's not
Yes.
100% legs. It's like there's a kinetic chain that's working. And when those get too far out of whack, is that where you maybe see a little bit more of those sort of overuse injuries? Their hip starts to hurt or their knee starts to hurt, and then they still want to golf on Wednesday and they're going to golf on Saturday because that's their boys. So they're going to go out and they kind of, now the knee's doing 29%, now it's doing 23%, now it's doing 8%, now it's doing 1%, and your upper body
Yep.
starts doing, and then anyway, so if you could maybe comment on your experience with that and then how hard that is to reverse that and how long that takes if we can't catch that with our students earlier. Because I think that's an important piece is you mentioned that before. Now you're not golfing for a month while you're trying to recover, and you seeing it from the other end, you're getting our damaged goods if we don't get on that right away. Right. I
Yeah.
guess that's good business for you, but at the same time,
Yeah,
anyway,
that's
go
not
ahead.
what I want to
If
build my
you can,
business on, unfortunately.
exactly.
So
Anyway, if you could comment a little bit about that whole kind of the idea of us staying on top of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess so. From what I'm understanding here is when we have a breakdown in its contribution, then something else has to take that load, right? That's what I'm hearing. So again, I hate repeating this, but it does depend on in terms of timeline at least, right? Because what the breakdown is very much going to determine what that timeline is. Because different tissues have different timelines for healing, as well as different grades of injury, right? A grade 3 tear is a full tear, a grade 1 is a mild one. So it's hard to say the exact numbers like that, but yes, oftentimes when it comes to an overuse injury, what you're seeing happen is you're losing something on that chain and something else is making up the slack where it shouldn't be. If you're thinking about it kind of in parts, the sequence is always the same for everybody, right? So even though people might have different aspects of things, every time I do my swing, let's talk about from the top of the backswing, the first thing that has to occur is I have to turn my pelvis to my hips. Then I incorporate my torso. I mean, obviously, I don't have a club or anything. Then my shoulders and arms come, and then the club, right? So that's always a consistent thing that has to occur. There's different degrees of that, and that variability changes based on flexibility, based on past injury history, based on things like that. But once you have that breakdown where you start to see something is doing more, you'll start to see it because it'll be reflected in the swing, right? If your torso is becoming more prevalent and your shoulders and things like that, and your hips are moving, that's going to obviously predispose you to more of a shoulder, upper spine, even an arm wrist issue because that's doing more of the work. And what you're going to see with that is that they're no longer able to dissociate, right? Those 5 key capabilities we talked about. If you start to see that they're losing an ability there where they were previously able to do so, that's when you start to see that very predictable injury. As I said before, that injuries are predictable, and you can start to see it and go, oh yeah, you're probably going to have this. There are certain people, the way I see them run, the way I see them squat, the way I see them swing a club, I can say, your wrist hurts, doesn't it? And they go, yeah, how'd you know that? Because it's predictable. You can see what's compensating and how that occurs. So identifying those breakdowns that we talked about, when you lose any of those characteristics, or when you start to see those changes in performance, because when you do lose that characteristic and your arms are doing more of the work because your hips can't, for example, you're going to start to see things in the follow through at impact that don't look the same, that are going to impact the delivery of the club through the ball. And when you have those impacts, you're going to start to see inconsistencies that I talked about, decreases in speed, because you're losing efficiency of the swing because your body's not doing what it should. Those, again, are those early predictors that I mentioned before. And those are the ways that I can see that we can start to modify and mitigate before we get to, giving me the garbage, as you said before, right? So yes, it's a good point.
Thank you for bringing that up. And I think that as instructors, it's important for us to stay on top and see, is that a little bit of a physical issue? Is it a mental issue, emotional, whatever might be? But also, is it a breakdown in that? Is it that was just a bad swing technically, whatever? But over time, if we can jump on that sooner, and I'm lucky because I have a couple of my students now. I've got one of my healthcare providers is one of my students, and he's TPI certified, but he'll work with my students. I've got a massage therapy, I've got a chiro. So we have a whole healthcare team behind our students here. So if I see that, at least I can get them out to talk to the appropriate person, or they may have their own, but we are at least aligned with that. So that
100%.
starts to fall outside of our area of expertise, but seeing that breakdown is our area of expertise. And identifying, is that breakdown like just a technical, you kind of went out of sequence there, or is that a physical impingement where you cannot do it, or you're not doing it for one reason or another? So I think it's just important for us to be very mindful of that, and sort of help our students get there so they don't end up in that area where they're just completely broken down and they've got to take a month off in the golf season. I mean, we've all had a student who have done that. And hopefully it wasn't from the golf swing. Hopefully it was because they were helping their friend move and they lifted too heavy of a box or something. So at least we can say, oh, that wasn't a bad golf swing that did it. But we should probably be a little bit more, or I mean, I'm sure everybody is, but just a little bit more in tune with that, and then jump in and suggest. I just think you better get that looked at, and then get them into the right people to do that, because it just only helps us get a more effective lesson plan and a more effective result for that student over time than it would to kind of ignore it and say, well, I hope they look after that. We'll see you next Wednesday. Like that's a real hard one, right?
Those are great comments, Curtis, and it's all about having good awareness to your clients, right? Using good video, with OnForm, you're using the anatomical man, or you're converting it over to 3D analysis. You can make a pretty good educated guess that something's gone awry and you need to move on and seek other professional help. Mark, how are we doing for time?
Well, I was just going to say, we don't want to keep Doc all night. I bet she's got a long day today and one more tomorrow and the next day. So we really yeah, I bet. We appreciate you so much. You give us a lot to think about. This has been recorded, so we can go back and watch some of your ideas and how to get warmed up properly, and how to look even just on our own golf, at this point, to see if there are certain things that are hurting more than they should be, and are we loading them too much and not letting them kind of recuperate properly. So thank you so much for coming out and sharing with us and growing our knowledge on the body, and being more compassionate for our students as well, and ultimately better serve them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, guys. I really appreciate the time and the engagement you guys all had. I thought this was an awesome discussion, and this was great. Thank you guys so much. I hope we can do more in the future together.
I'm suggesting that Dr. Andrew come to the Toronto Golf and Travel Show. So if he does, you'll
do it.
Swing by the booth and meet some of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some of them.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time and all the effort you've put into this.
Of
Yeah.
course. Thank you guys. Appreciate
Great
it.
job.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much. You're great. Awesome.
Of
Thank you.
course. Thank you
Thanks
guys.
everybody. 2 weeks we're gonna have another session on Monday night. So thanks everybody that's joined in, and I hope you had a great night. And watch your email. We'll send that link out in 2 weeks. We have two presentations 2 weeks from now.
Great.
Brady, thanks a lot,
Thank you,
Mark.
Mark.
Okay, guys.
Take care, everyone.
Good night,
Thanks, Doc.
everyone.
Good
Night.
night.
See you later.
Thank you.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.